Hey YouTube, Alex here. I want to answer the question, am I just another passport bro? I'm coming to you from Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I'm actually on the path to Doi Suthep. I'm stopping at the Hue Keo waterfall. It's a gorgeous November day here in Chiang Mai. It's still warm. I think today was in the upper 80s Fahrenheit. The trees on the path do provide some wonderful shade that helps to keep you cool while you're walking the path. Not sure if I have to walk past the restaurant to get to the waterfall. I think that actually turned out to be a restaurant, not the path that I'm looking for actually. Looks like I found it around the entrance. Look at how beautiful it is. A whole lot of folks here today enjoying this wonderful spot. The path continues. It's really mind-blowing. Didn't realize how many people would be here. Why is the answer no? In this video, I'll discuss why I first came to Thailand 5 years ago, and the reason is not dating. So when I first came to Thailand 5 years ago, I'll share a bit about where I was at. I'd actually gone to Burning Man the previous year and met my friend Jesse. Jesse's a wonderful friend of mine, and we stayed in touch after Burning Man, and he actually ended up going to Thailand not too long after Burning Man. And I remember reaching out to him and asking, hey Jesse, I've got to get a wisdom tooth out. At the time, I needed to get a wisdom tooth out. I'm going to do that, but it's going to cost a lot, and I know Thailand's going to cost a lot also, at least the flight. And he said, well, just consider the fact that the price you're going to pay for the removal here in Thailand is much less than what you would pay in the US. And in the US, I've been quoted $2,000 in Denver, Colorado. And so I actually reached out to a few different clinics in Chiang Mai where Jesse was living at the time, and they quoted me at like $250 a tooth, something like a third of the price of actually getting it done in the US. At the time, I found a round trip flight to Thailand for around 500 US. Now that flights are more expensive now than they were 5 years ago, but that sounded like a great deal. Why not just take a month off, go to Thailand for a month, get the work done, and then come back to America when I need to go back to work. So that's what I ended up doing. I actually came to Chiang Mai for the month of May in 2018, and I had a wonderful experience. It's just such a lovely place to live, such a lovely place to stay. And it was at that point I knew I wanted to try living in Thailand at some point in my life, and I'm glad that 5 years later I have that opportunity. I'm living in Thailand right now, and while it may not be forever, I'm really enjoying my experience. The reason I make this video is that a lot of people have this stereotype or assumption that if a guy comes to Southeast Asia, it's strictly for dating, and that's the only reason why anybody would want to come here. And as you can tell behind me with this wonderful nature, there's many more reasons to go overseas, especially for people in the West in general that may just want to try something different or do something different. Now, is dating a legitimate reason to come to this part of the world? Yes, I mean, certainly that's a valid reason. To those who come to this part of the world for only that reason, if for some reason their first relationship doesn't work out, they may swear off of traveling altogether, and I don't want people to have that negative experience dissuade them from enjoying it. For me personally, I look at relationships as dating as sort of icing on the cake. It's a nice to have. I don't have to have it to be a happy person. In other words, if I came over here and that wasn't part of the experience, it wouldn't faze me. I would still want to come to Southeast Asia. I'd still want to spend time here. There's a whole lot of reasons to come over here and enjoy living over here. There's so much unique nature in this part of the world that's quite different than where I'm from in the US. Not only do you have Thailand where I am now, but you also have Vietnam, you have Cambodia, you have the Philippines, you have Indonesia, you have Malaysia, you have Singapore, you have as well Myanmar, Laos, a lot of variety there. It's such a gorgeous day here in Chiang Mai. I think that part of my advice or part of my suggestion is don't wrap up your love for this region in a relationship, because when the relationship ends, you may go back, color the entire experience in a negative way. I think it's important to also consider the variety of cultural events that you can partake in. Of course, here in Thailand, Buddhism is very, very prevalent, and you have a lot of opportunities to participate in cultural events or to visit various temples and have these really unique experiences that are not so common in your home country. Coming here to Thailand is really an opportunity to be immersed in that culture, as well as, of course, the language, the food, the people. It's really mind-blowing. Places like this are right at your fingertips when you are here in Chiang Mai. I walked here from my apartment. This is the kind of site that you can visit if you get your passport and you book that ticket, you get on that flight, and you go for something that you've never experienced before. This is the kind of place you can visit in Thailand. This is literally within walking distance from my apartment. I walked maybe a half hour to get up here. That's the kind of thing that you may not ever see in your home country, right? Depending on where you're from or the area that you live in. I know that some parts of the United States have more Buddhists than others, but certainly not everywhere has these kinds of magnificent temples, right? So if you want to be a passport bro, as you can tell, culture is just one of those things that you might enjoy while living overseas. Something else that I find interesting is that here in Thailand, they still make their own stuff. If I'm understanding correctly, that's actually a milk bottling plant, or at least that's what it looks like. I think that that's something that you just don't see as much of in the States. In the States, of course, a lot of manufacturing has been sent overseas. That kind of thing is just typically not commonly found in a residential area, or at least semi-residential area. I think that to see something like that, you really have to go to like an industrial park, perhaps on the edge of town or the outskirts of a city. So to see that is really just kind of a neat thing, something that you don't really see back in the States. And that leads me into my next point. You get this sense of spontaneity here that you don't really get in the West. Everything is so orderly and organized, and everything's on time, and there's so many rules. In places like Thailand, other places I've been as well, like in South America, for example, you just have a less rule-oriented society, and some people would point out that the reason you can have a more free society, a more spontaneous society in a place like Thailand is that people are more collectivist, they're more group-oriented, they tend to follow the rules and are more considerate of the people around them. This is different than individualist societies, as is the case in the West, countries like the US, countries like Canada, Australia. Why don't we check this out? I think for a fair amount of people back in the US, it's not that they are necessarily unhappy, but that in some cases they're just bored. They're bored of the routine, they're bored of the repetition, they're bored of life being so predictable. That leads me to my next point. If it was just boring, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But it's also become stressful with the rapidly increasing cost of living, with the inflation that's affecting countries like the US. People have to give up some of the things that they enjoy or want to do because it's simply out of budget for them. And that's really not as much the case for me here in Thailand. Now, of course, some people are going to bring up, I am not working locally. Of course, I don't have a work permit. But it's worth pointing out, my lifestyle is also more modest here. I don't have a personal vehicle here in Thailand. So some people would say, oh, well, you know, that's somehow that's cheating the system to not own, maintain, and operate a personal vehicle. But that's something that you can get away with here. Whereas back in the US, you have to have a personal vehicle. Unless you live in New York City, you're typically going to have a personal vehicle. Most people I know have a personal vehicle. They have to maintain it, which is not affordable or cheap by any means these days. When you think about oil changes, tire replacements, gasoline, in case you get your car broken into like mine did. When I was in the Bay Area, Northern California, I got a window smashed, had to pay $180 just to get the window replaced. I had this sense, and I've heard this from other YouTubers that live in Southeast Asia for an extended period of time, that it seemed like every day there was some new bad thing happening. It felt like this really kind of vicious cycle where there was always something coming up, a bill that I had to pay. I was worried about some kind of situation where you just never feel like you have enough. It's not like that here. My next point is that it's much more affordable for Western people to spend an extended period of time in Southeast Asia compared to visiting comparable locations. Let's say you're going to go to Florida. You're going to spend a lot more money than you would in Southeast Asia in general. And I know some people say, oh, well, it's not cheap anymore. I think that if you look at the cost of living in the West, it's still cheap. The definition of cheap, in my opinion, changes as people's living standards change, right? A person 100 years ago would not have to budget for a cell phone and a cell phone bill. But nowadays, that's considered a normal thing to have. So if you look at the prices in Western countries, in the Bay Area for like a room in a boarding house, I was paying like $1,100 a month. Here in Chiang Mai, for a nice studio apartment in a modern building, I'm paying about $250 a month. So that's roughly 75, but really more than that, 75% off for my rent. And I live in a much nicer place. It's much quieter, much more relaxing. I have better neighbors for sure. And I get a good night's sleep. I'm not getting woken up by construction every single day at 6 a.m. Sometimes it seemed like. Not only that, but some of the foods that I like are much more affordable here. As an example, for me to get sushi in the US, I'm looking to spend probably $20 to $25 in most cases. Here, I can go and get something similar for, I don't know, about a third of the price. It seems like a half to a third, depending on where you go and how fancy the place is, but it's much more accessible, right? Like for going out once, I can do that same thing twice. For wings, for example. Wings, if I get like, say, 10 at a restaurant, I'm paying a fourth of what I would pay in the US. I mean, I remember Fire Wings in NorCal, they were up to the point where in a combination where if you were trying to purchase like, let's say 10 wings, then you'd easily spend $30 on that. They were up to like nearly or right around $3 a wing, where here it's less than $1 per wing. In summary, services that normally would be out of reach, except for perhaps special occasions, can be much more frequent here at a lower price point. I think massage is another big example of this. You'll easily spend $70, $80 on a massage for 1 hour, where here in Chiang Mai, you can easily find that for, say, $7 to $10 US. You can always pay more, of course, if you want a more luxurious setting, but it goes back to the accessibility, right? I just would never get a massage in the US because the amount of money it costs for one, that's just something that can be used in an emergency. Here, there's not as much of that. Emergency or something unexpected expense-wise just isn't as extreme as it is back home. I know a lot of people back home that put off handling a lot of problems because it's simply too expensive to deal with it immediately. I think another thing that attracts people is, of course, the weather. Right now, back in the States, there's plenty of places where it's freezing. I actually spoke with somebody from South Korea yesterday, and it's quite cold in South Korea as well. I don't have that here. I'm in a light shirt and sweatpants. I'm comfortable, maybe a little bit warm, but I like to wear some longer clothes just to protect from the sun. Not only is it more affordable to have these kinds of food, but you also notice just a larger variety of Asian food in general. Of course, that should be obvious that we're here in Southeast Asia, so there's going to be a bigger variety there, but it's really a wonderful surprise, especially coming from the Midwestern US, where these kinds of restaurants aren't as prevalent. Do they have some options? Certainly, and they are quality options. The fact that these types of places are often located in cool cities that are expensive means, like I said, they can just be out of reach price-wise. Example of this would be Thai food. Thai food is quite expensive in the US. You can easily spend $12, $15 on pad Thai, where here in Chiang Mai, the same dish is $1.50. It's just so much more accessible to have something like that. It's not as bad like in the US or other Western countries as if you're cooking for a group and you're buying in bulk and you're not having to hire or pay for the labor of somebody else like you would if you were going to a restaurant or something like that. But here you can just like afford to pay for someone to do it for you, and it definitely frees up your time, where in the West, because a lot of these services are expensive, it feels like it contributes to us feeling rushed all the time. Okay, I need to figure out if I can do this thing myself because hiring it out would be cost prohibitive. It feels like we spend a lot of our time in the West, a lot of our free time trying to do errands and trying to do chores, not really getting to enjoy some of those times as much as we'd like. That's definitely another reason that doesn't involve relationships or dating that you should give consideration to when it comes to checking out other countries. As an example, I just left the gym wearing these sandals, and I wore these sandals during my session at the gym. And you might be thinking, hey, isn't it dangerous to go to the gym without proper shoes on? Well, the first thing is I've been going to the gym for like almost 10 years now. I've never had a issue. I'm fairly cautious in the gym. Even in wearing sandals, I try to do things carefully and precisely, etc. Aside from that, if you think about it, gym shoes aren't going to really protect your foot if you drop a weight on it, for example. And I'm reminded of an incident in San Francisco when I went to the local gym and I happened to be wearing sandals. One of the managers of this public recreation center immediately comes out and says, hey, you can't be here. Like, just not, hey, excuse me, sir, not, hey, there's some rules or something like that. Immediately, hey, you can't be here. And I said, excuse me? And he says, yeah, you're wearing sandals. You're not wearing gym shoes. You have to leave. Now, this is a gym that I frequented once in a while in the city. There's no cost to enter. This guy who has this job is so excited to tell people to leave. This is a small gym, mind you. They're already so risk averse because it is the US, so they have very little equipment because the US, there's lawsuits are so commonplace that there's a lot of things that happen simply to prevent lawsuits, not because anybody actually wants it to be that way, but because there's so much potential risk. And so this guy asked me to leave, and he's so excited about it. Well, I just worked out here in Thailand in Chiang Mai at my gym. I wore sandals. I've noticed other people wearing sandals, especially when they're doing leg exercises like squats. And it was so refreshing to not have somebody coming up to me saying, hey, you gotta leave. Now, some might say the gym in San Francisco is a free gym, but that kind of thing would happen even at a paid gym. I've definitely noticed that any gym I've been to in the US, they have strict requirements as to what you can and can't wear. And I understand clothes. But yeah, nobody approached me, asked me to leave. It was totally fine for me to wear sandals. In Thailand, it's very much like if you make a mistake, it's on you, where in the West, they're constantly trying to restrict and regulate behavior to the extent that there are people who their entire job is to regulate the behavior of others. And I'm not talking about just police, but I'm talking about people in general. They have all of these different people whose job it is to basically enforce the rules. And it's created this like attitude of not only are they wanting to enforce the rules, which is fine, do your job, but they get off on it. They love the idea that they're telling other people what to do, that they're able to just tell somebody, hey, do this, or hey, do that. And it's just very strange because the West was supposed to be a place of freedom, and we see now that especially economic freedom is in decline. These experiences really just push you away from being calm and make it harder to just relax and chill out because you just, I don't know, you want to be positive, you want to be upbeat, and it seems like you can meet other similar-minded people here in Thailand, but back home it definitely feels more difficult to meet uplifting people that aren't part of that like hustle culture. What do I mean by hustle culture? Well, that's really another point that I love about Thailand, is that you don't feel like you're in a rush all the time. Like back home, there always seems to be some kind of deadline or errand or something that you've got to do. You just don't have that experience as much here. And it's not just a vacation thing. I think it's also just, there is that mañana attitude here. People are kind of willing to just be flexible on deadlines. I think this is different than back home where deadlines are pretty strict and people are expected to meet them every single day and week and month and year. There's all kinds of different kinds of deadlines that really create competing priorities. Now, is it all bad back home? Absolutely not. There's plenty of wonderful things about back home, but I really wanted to take some time and respond to the question, am I a passport bro? Because I think that's the assumption, and I want to explain that there's many, many reasons to want to visit a place like Thailand. For example, the swimming pool at my condo looks really incredible. As far as freedom goes, from what I've heard, it's more common to have fewer rules in these collectivist societies because people generally follow the rules, where back home in the US, it's much more individualistic, and without rules, these types of societies would be much more chaotic because people would be going in entirely different directions, right? Where here, most people generally, if there's a certain rule, they'll follow it. They're not going to make a fuss about it like you would see in the US. It's pleasant, you know, it's really just pleasant to not have that hamster wheel feeling all the time. To some extent too, I'm kind of critical of people using that phrase because it's not exactly cheap to come to a different country, right? Even if you're talking about going from North America to South America, when you think about the flights, the hotel, the food, the transportation, all of these can be prohibitively expensive. So the idea that somebody is going to go over to another country just to date, or that all the people that want to travel abroad are doing it just today, is ridiculous. And I think a lot more people are going to come around because people are going to have more freedom, right? As an example, I don't currently have children. This is probably atypical compared to my ancestors who probably had kids at like say 18, 19, 20. I do have that freedom, and that may change someday such that it's a great idea, I think, while I'm young and still have the energy to do a lot of different things. Why not check out some of these other places? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't understand why it has to be this us versus them kind of thing. I think that it makes sense if the cost of living, for example, is much less. That should be reason alone to justify it for a lot of people. Like, I understand that that's probably reason number 2 behind dating for some people as to why they come to a place like Thailand or Southeast Asia as a region in general, but you just get a lot for your money. Like, even if you're not paying what you were 5, 10, 20 years ago in this region, you're still getting a lot. Like, the condo I'm staying at, much, much nicer than what I could get in the US for a comparable amount. In fact, this condo is cheaper than it was 5 years ago for me. This is different than in the US, where you're going to pay a lot of money for an old rundown building, probably not have the best neighbors. It's just going to be a stressful experience, where here it's just so nice. There's like a security guard downstairs. I don't really think that there's any risk of danger, but it's just still nice to see that kind of thing. What a beautiful day in Chiang Mai. An additional reason some of you may have not considered is that for somebody like me, being Asian, in the United States, Asian people are a minority of the population, whereas, of course, 99.9% of people in Southeast Asia are, by definition, Asian, and you get a lot of different interesting Asian cultures in this region that you wouldn't really encounter much in the US. It's really, really cool for somebody like me who didn't really grow up around a lot of people that looked like me or liked the same foods that I liked or liked the same entertainment that I liked. All these kinds of things are much more common over here. I'm regularly encountering people that are into anime, people that are into technology, people that are into different kinds of spicy or funky foods that may be kind of strange to some Western people, but I like it. For example, kimchi, huge fan of kimchi. But you get this sense over here, you're getting closer to your home country's cultures or culture, or if you happen to have people in your ancestry that are from one of these countries, then it also will give you an opportunity that way to perhaps go and meet your extended family that you wouldn't normally get to see because it's just so far away from the United States. People live busy lives, and it's difficult to justify the cost for a short trip, right? I mean, if you think about like coming all the way over to this side of the world for a week, it's a lot of money to spend and jet lag. And really for me, it's not the cost as much as it's just stress of long-term travel or a long-haul travel where you're sitting on an airplane for like 14, 15 hours. For me, it can take a while to adjust, recuperate from these kinds of flights. It may be the same case for you. So in this video, I hope I've answered the question, am I just another passport bro? Really, should you come over here if you don't just want to date? Or should guys solely come over here for the dating? And that answer is no. I think that there's a lot that this region offers. I didn't even get into the conversation about nature and things like snorkeling, diving that you can experience over here. Perhaps also there's other specifics I could get into, but let me know down in the comments below what would be helpful, what kind of subjects that you'd like for me to talk about. Definitely give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.